Okay, so in this one we're just going to deal with static voicings. Most of the time this is actually, for me personally, just static voicings, one chord to the other, just continuously for a long period can become kind of boring. But however, we need like a background or a basis or a foundation, so we need to start somewhere. So we're going to do static voicings with just block chords. And bass below in root position. Everything is going to be root position. We'll probably include some seventh chords in this and that. So the first thing you may want to do is break away from this parallelism kind of movement. Now this does have a place in music, and we're going to cover this in a later episode because it's a very cool effect. I couldn't do stuff like that just walking up. Let me think of just a few more examples before we get into it. So, stuff like this would not be possible, the sound of it. And it has a really nice sound. And I'm using a lot of parallelism. Here's a good example. I just thought of this. Just parallel triads. Now, you try to play that any other way by trying to avoid parallelism. See, it doesn't work. So there's a time and place for that, and we'll cover that later because it is a cool method of composing with parallelism. So, and I do use it all the time, in fact. But just we're trying to do smooth connections. So we're just going to use 1 4 2 5. So this is going to be basic for most people, but what you want to do really move to the closest possible chord that will get you to the next chord with minimal movement. And the reason I went to the E there is so I could return to the same exact position A. So, but however, that does not have to occur like that, and I'm going to show you in a second. That would be how to return. So moving these voicings to the closest tones of the next chord will often produce smooth transitions. So we could do it like this. So going by the E with a third above, I could go to this position of A. E with the fifth above, I could go to this position of A, finding the closest tones. E, A. So you could rise up like that. It's still pretty smooth. The only time you're actually going to find closest tones being a problem is when a chord's a second apart from each other, minor or major second. You either have to move in parallel, which we're trying to avoid right now, and this is where this would come in, contrary or opposite motion. We don't have any things that are a second apart, so we're going to use contrary or opposite motion though with this example. In towards each other, away from each other, in towards each other, away from each other. So every chord change either goes away from each other, and it gives it sort of an independence on the outside. See, do the same thing up here. Bass goes up, the chords go down, chords go up, the bass goes down. So contrary or opposite motion. Okay. And this is going to come in very handy with parallel chords that are a second away from each other, major or minor. And of course we have arpeggiation with these basic chord movement. And this has nothing to do with piano. This can happen in any kind of situation. So I could go downwards on each chord. Okay, so that's one option. Just a little faster. Gives it a little bit more interest than just the static changes, so not much, but you could go down and up, down, then up. You could do something like that. Remember, this has nothing to do with piano itself, so you could arpeggiate on one side and just hold static chords on the other. Now that is very pianistic, but it could still be applied to orchestra or guitar or whatever. So arpeggiation on one side, no arpeggiating on the other, so just static. So let's start dealing with sevenths. So in sevenths and upper extension chords, you don't necessarily need that fifth, okay? Your ear still hears that A seventh. So now the problem arises here if I want everything in root position. In traditional functional harmony, they want you to resolve that seventh downward, but that forces us into first inversion. So we're going to go ahead and so we're going to ignore that, and on the D, we're just going to resolve that seventh upward. So we have a seventh chain of 1, 4, 2, 5, okay? And so let's extend that to A major seventh, D major seventh, B minor seventh, E dominant seventh, and then we'll go to the nearest voicing of A major seventh, D major seventh, B minor seventh, E dominant seventh, A major seventh. Actually, I was tapping out the sevenths except on the first A. I apologize, I missed it. So it's becoming a little bit more interesting with staticness. There's no rhythmic variety, but it's a little bit more interesting this way. So by doing something like that, because the voicings changed on the second go around, so we could do it like this with very close quarters, kind of sevenths. D major seventh, B minor seventh, E dominant seventh, okay? And you could actually keep chaining this A major seventh, D major seventh, B minor seventh, E dominant seventh, A major seventh, D major seventh, B minor seventh. So we're going through all the voicings possible in these close quarters by doing this. Now we're about the beginning where we started, so that gave us the ability to memorize all close quarter voicings. Okay. Here's something to take notice of. The close quarter voicings have a less resonant sound, where the dissonance, in which the seventh would be considered the dissonance, has a bit of distance. It sounds more airy, so keep that in mind. And they'll also come in really handy when we deal with polychords. So close quarters versus a little bit more airy distance chords, like, and I have to arpeggiate the D. It's just too hard for me. My hands don't stretch like that. So let's go back to these close quarters again. And one thing you could do is just arpeggiate basic chord tones on the bottom while the sevenths are above. Doing the same sequence we did before, and you could keep repeating it. So another thing you can do is alternate between close quarters and a more open resonant, like that. More open resonant, a little bit closer quarters. So you could alternate between, or shift. So alternate between close quarters and more open resonant voicing. So you can arpeggiate using the sevenths like that. Okay. There's no rule says you can't use the seventh in your arpeggios. So I do this 4, 2, 5. So you could use these sevenths in the arpeggiations. For effect, you could have this enormous gap. Remember we talked about open and close position? Well, this is a case where this is not going to apply. You could do this kind of arpeggiation thing downwards from A major seventh, D major seventh, G minor, or B minor seventh, E dominant seventh. So again, open and close position may be a bit unfeasible in many situations. So here's a little trick though. If you play a chord a third above your root, the triad a third above, it automatically produces the seventh. So by doing 1, 4, 2, 5, playing the chord a third above gives us the seventh. So you could have arpeggiation on one side just on basic chord tones, while the other side has the sevenths. using the thing before as where we're doing this falling sequence. Now we're starting to generate a little bit more interest with staticness by doing such things. So again, a chord a third above the triad automatically gives us that seventh. So just keep this in mind when if you struggle to find the seventh. That's a really quick and easy way to do it. And works well with arpeggiation. So remember, this isn't about keyboard. These kind of effects can work in even with guitar music. I mean, I know most guitar players are probably never going to do stuff like that, but so yeah, this is not instrument specific. This is just a technique, arpeggiation. And what we did here was just kind of give like little basic foundations for stuff we can do with just simple staticness in root position, and eventually leading up to the last example, which had more interest than the rest of it because there was motion with arpeggiation, timing, rhythmic timing, even though simple, and then that falling part. So and it generated some kind of interest, at least, as opposed to just playing statically through the chords. And now I know a lot of styles in modern times do use simple staticness, and there is a time and place for that in every style of music. It's just not something I would personally want to do for a very long time because to me it kind of gets boring. But that's a personal preference. And just a quick note, we're not overly worried about how many voices are involved in this particular situation here. So we're not 4 voices, not 3 voices, all that. We're just not even thinking about that. So we'll leave it at that, and we'll go on to the next episode. Start trying to generate a little bit more interest and actually stick in some more techniques.